Gibe Samamgi Lola Benje Sangye Devasham Sangye Chadan Zogi Chonama Chanchu Pade Dani Gyamsuji Daki Cheshe Gibe Samamgi Lola Benje Sangye Devasham Sangye Chadan Zogi Chonama Chanchu Pade Dani Gyamsuji Dagi Cheshe Gibe Samamgi Dola Penche Sangye Devasho.
다 자기가 사진 이만이 가는 다 네. 되게 그런 것도 가리면 돌로 봐봐는 막 쏜 거지. 원인에 봐 둘러 찍자. 저 원인에 봐서 또 시부지 슈지. 아, 뒤 시부 되게 지기나 신경을 된다면 다 지겨. 돌로 봐봐는 숨만 신경을 내는 지기나 신경을 다 콜라. 양도 시지가 봐. 샤고라 다 시부지 공시지. 시에네 다 시부지 공시고 지당제례들 북체원들 빼는 거라도 콜로 당보세 다 마시샴들 내용 거래. 콜로 당보나 화랑 콜로 당보 니 콜로 당보래 있으나 콜로 당비 센시 속으로 와 센시 기어지. 콜니 콜로 니 장한테도 간가로 콜로 바라봐래. 바로 센시 기어지.
맞아.
다 너도 공대인데 가만히 있으면 너도 공대인데 콜로 타면 나올래.
센시.
니가 콜로 타면 센시 걸리는 거. 이제도 니께서 깡가로 얘기 듣니 콜로 당보당 이반이지 공시 시행하고 수시행에서는 어디 공시 시행이 그래서는 상계 좀 된다는 콜로 당보를 결혼들이 중자 이반 근데 중지니까 안도 좋았더니 다 니가 내지 결혼한 거가 어디 공대인데 내용으로 왔어 그래서 다 방송하고 시에서고 어디 공대 날리고 모르겠어 다 교환에 발소 시 공시 코에 어디 공대는 지키하고 어디 공대 용타 대장 된게 뭐야 아 가르쳐요 쌤 담배 다 개바디 또 캠보다 마소나 로빈 파와 통에 통에 야나 파와 통에 송지는 호창 지슈를 개바 로빈 인이라 또 공주 송지연아 대창 타마 걸어 정말로 어떤 거 지금 얘기 너무 된다고 다 얘기를 지금 거라에 막 도당도 보고 중고랑 도당도 보고 네 지금 연구를 망쳐 깬다다 마소는 두고 뭐 당하고 있다는 거 근데 이 도저 공대는 시작했어요 도저 공대는 가르치기 있잖아 교환에 발라서 시와로 시고 TV 공시되는 거지. 다 시고디 공시고 쇼 수지다. 원인에도 공시고는 다기 순간상이 뭐 미상 순간상. 다 교환에 발라서 시 공시들 도저 공대에 나라 순간 마셔라 재밌지.
So now our task is to go about in the second turning of the wheel to figure out what it was the Buddha really had in mind when he talked about things. According to the mind-only school, what was it that the Buddha really had in mind when he taught those 5 characteristics? We finished the first one, which was the fact that things have no nature of their own, and now we'll be going on to the next 4. In general, when we speak about turnings of the wheel, we're thinking about specific texts that typify that turning of the wheel. So we're talking about the second turning of the wheel or the medium turning of the wheel in terms of those 5 characteristics which typify the contents of the second turning of the wheel. And then there are other works or other subjects which typify, which are classic examples of the wheel. And so we've been through those, we've been talking about those. When you talk about the third turning of the wheel, the job of the third turning of the wheel was, people came up to Lord Buddha and said, what did you mean during the first and the second turnings of the wheel? So if you're going to talk about what is the content or what are the classic examples of subject matter that comes up during the third turning of the wheel, well, that would be discussions just like the one we're having now, which is, finding out what it is the Buddha meant during the second turning of the wheel, and specifically during the latter 4 of the 5 characteristics which are typical of the second turning of the wheel. So we'll be going now into the third of those sections. Lord Buddha here, when he's discussing the latter four, he will not be covering all three of the groups that he covered when he discussed the first of the five, right? When he discussed the fact that things have no nature, he discussed all three groups of objects. But when he gets to the second part, which is discussing those four characteristics, he's going to be leaving out, he's going to be skipping one of those three groups. And in Jetsun Karpa's presentation, Jetsun Karpa is going to be quoting primarily that sutra called, the sutra in which the Buddha explains his true intent during all the other sutras, which is called Dode Gongja. And then he's going to go on to quote, as necessary, the great forefather, which is called the great Kembo, right? Like almost the great abbot or the great master of the mind-only school, which will be Master Sangha. And then he'll also be drawing in Master Vasubandhu and other great masters as needed in his presentation. So that's where we're going now. In the next presentation, which is the latter four of the five, right? Which I've already mentioned that he's going to leave out one of the groups. He's not going to treat one of the groups. Don't forget that the first of the four is going to be called looking into the fact that the arisal of things or the beginning of things is not something which happens of its own accord or by definition. So if you had to guess which of the three groups might be left out in this discussion, which one do you think it would be? Huh? Kunda de Shamnado. Nagi Seni could do this. Kewa Mepa Sani. Shaba Mashaba Niche, Shaba Chiche, Malani. If we talk about a growing of things which does not exist by definition, if I say I'm about to teach you what the Buddha meant when he said things don't grow of their own accord or by definition, then which of the three groups do you think he's going to leave out? Huh? Yongdu Bina. We're talking about what could it be, and at this point you can kind of flip around and change your mind if you want. How many does that apply to? Things don't have a nature of growing of their own accord, by definition. Yeah. But Chidan Kyowa Rankitani can do but my said the Galea, the Pedro Shenwangi Tone Shegaris. So, is the Shenwang, things which are caused, things which are dependent, is this the category which you think should be left out when we discuss that, or the category that should be left in when we discuss that? That dieten the Shegaris is not a Pia Yomares. Shenwang never So if you take him by himself, if you treat things which are dependent by themselves, things which grow from other things by themselves, is this the one you'd want to concentrate on when you talk about things not having a nature of growing of their own accord or by definition? Yeah. So now you're going to ask, with regard to things that grow from other things, can you say that in the mind-only school? No. That it doesn't have any growing by definition. And if you say of the other two categories, oh, these don't have any nature of beginning of their own accord, or by definition, is that okay? Can you say that about them? That kosa siyadi kunda kitem she chogres katu. Koran siyadi yongdu kitem she chogres. Nigalo no kitem she chogres. So can you use it for both kunda and yongdu or not?
No, yongdu doesn't.
Yongdu makyawa meva. If you're gonna keep lowering the price when you sell this, if you're gonna keep lowering the price when you offer me the money for this thing, you should have told me from the beginning the price. First you said we couldn't use this expression towards us too, and now you're saying maybe we can use it for one of them, and make up your mind. It does use this expression for, what do you call, constructs and for emptiness, and he does not use this expression refer to dependent things with this expression. So, okay, we'll agree with that. Anyway, jokes get better the hotter it gets. I mean, when the weather is hot, then maybe we need more jokes. Sounds, I think he said that. People have more and more faith. I don't know, I didn't get it. Anyway, he's telling more jokes when the weather's hotter and keeps people awake. Okay. Faith increases when the teaching gets funnier. People are more likely to come and leave the food behind. We'll be beginning the quotation from the sutra where the Buddha explains the sutras, what he meant when he spoke the sutras. And then they're going to be going through, first at the top of page 19, he specifies when he says Dhammo Dhamma, he's saying, when I say things don't have a nature of going of their own accord or by definition, then he's kicking out the middle one, and he's concentrating on the first one and the last one. So that's, he's already agreeing with you on that. And then when he goes down, he starts going down to the four characters. This is from the sutra, right? And first he says, he starts going, let me see. He says things don't things don't start by definition. Things don't stop by definition. Things have been peace from the beginning, meaning not self-existent from the beginning, and things have been nirvana or gone beyond. Right? We talked about it the other day. And he says each one begins to push the other one. Each one triggers the next one. So he says because things don't have a natural growing, then they don't have a natural stopping. Because they don't have a natural stopping, they don't have a natural state of peace. Because they don't have a natural state of peace, they don't have a natural state of nirvana. And each one triggers the next one. Now how that is going to go in here. And we're only referring to constructs right now. We're going to start this explanation only referring to constructs. Again, it's a process by which each one of the four acts as a justification for the next one. So each one is triggering the next one. So when we say that kuntak, things which are constructs, first of all, they don't have any nature of being existing by definition at all. We've already established that. That was the first one. They don't have any nature of existing by definition. Since they don't have any nature of existing by definition, they cannot have a nature of having grown by definition. Now, whether or not they grow, or just now you're approaching that question. Since they don't have any nature of existing by definition, they cannot have any nature of having grown by definition. Anything that hasn't grown can't stop. Okay? Nothing that hasn't grown could stop. So, needless to say, if you say this thing doesn't have a nature of having grown by definition, then naturally that leads on to the next one, which is they don't have any nature of having stopped by definition. And these two qualities, not having started by definition, not having stopped by definition, is that some kind of quality that suddenly changed? It used to be different, and now it used to be one way, and now it's another way. Like the growth and stopping of things used to be existing by definition, and nowadays doesn't exist by definition because Lord Buddha decided that now it shouldn't exist by definition or something like that. Is that the way that these two lacks of self-nature are? No, they've been that way forever, ever since the beginning of time. And that's called the Samana Shiva. They have been in a sense peace. Peace meaning the state of not existing by definition, the state of not existing self-existently. They have been that way forever. They've been that way since the beginning of the beginning. And that's what the next one means. Samana Shiva means they have been in a sense peace or a lack of self-existence from the beginning, and it's not some kind of new story. Then you take, they are forever gone beyond the state of a self-existent birth and self-existent stopping. They've gone completely beyond the state of being born by some kind of by definition and stopping by definition. So if you take some sort of a threshold and you say, this is called grief, okay? This is called grief in a sense, or suffering in a sense. A self-existent starting and a self-existent stopping are called grief. Then all kundak things, all constructs, have forever passed beyond that grief. They've always been beyond that grief. Remember that the Tibetan word for Nibbana is to pass beyond grief. That's the last of the four. And so when Lord Buddha says that passing beyond grief doesn't exist by definition either, what he's saying is that with regard to constructs, their stopping and their beginning, which has forever not been existing by definition, they are totally passed beyond that state. They have gone beyond the state of self-existence, and in that sense, they are gone beyond grief, which is the Tibetan word for Nibbana.
다티 게제 독수다 꼭꼭 시타마서는 얘가 아무 프랑베데 독서 하리 메자 아니샤마 시디 메스마 비자이데 하리 메바 독서 가리 통이데 메메메사.
Now here the Buddha is making denial after denial after denial, saying, this is not true of this, this is not true of this, this is not this, this is not this, this lacks this, this lacks this, this lacks this, this lacks this. What does he lack? What do they lack? What do you think he's talking? Why is he concentrating on lack? Doesn't have. What's the very biggest root, crucial thing that isn't there? Ngoni said, me tusadi, me said tusadi, ngoni said this. Kosena, ragi said this.
아니 괜히 들어오면 코메 빠체다 아니샤마
You're correct. Very clear. Actually, you're both kind of correct, but you're more correct. And the crucial point is, from the beginning. The batteries may last in the camera for 40 minutes, but it won't keep our monastery going for a minute. So you got the main point. It all goes back to number one. It all goes back to the fact that things don't exist by definition. And because that first thing doesn't exist by definition, then the fact that things grow doesn't exist by definition, and then the fact that things stop doesn't exist by definition, and etc., etc., etc. Each one triggers the next.
다 근다 하나 가르쳐서 라이팅 좀 쪄다 가까지 몇 가르쳐서 딱
So we have sort of a logical statement here. We can say, consider constructs, okay? They don't exist by definition because, and can you supply the reason for me?
Since they don't start by definition, no. Yeah, they don't start by definition.
Consider conducted to church and I didn't translate the literature correctly, okay? He says, consider constructs. They neither grow nor stop. They neither begin nor stop by definition because they don't exist by definition.
얘는 쟤네 슈구쭈꾸 데라 숨 인간 꿈에서 인간가 같아. 장골라마 동가와 집이 대송아 지혜송소서 도리 공 찍지. 군다라 제가미 비기센 투라기 테니키 만도도 끝이야.
And that's exactly what Geshe Kappa says, 5 lines from the bottom of page 19, when he says, we have to posit as a reason for the fact that constructs don't neither start nor stop by definition. The reason that we can put forth is that, well, they just don't exist by definition.
What the difference? How do you get a DLS? I can't want to go for you, not get a Geshe. I'm telling you to a map, I use a car, middle one, not
So if you say that for the reason that they don't exist by definition, they don't start and they don't stop by definition, then you're implying that they start and stop a different way. Well, what way would that be? How to say that? I shot that money make it door, you know? Don't you remember that? That's correct. Give Michael that extra key to that door that you got. Seems like you got this extra key to that door and keep playing it out. How about we do it this way? If you say it this way, they have no starting and they have no stopping because they are
unchanging.
Because they exist by definition. So if you say it that way, then what happens to the starting and the stopping? So don't exist. They don't exist. There's no starting, there's no stopping because they don't exist by definition. If they did exist, if you say that they don't have, because they don't exist by definition, they don't have starting and stopping. Now, if they did have starting and stopping, then what would happen?
Then they would exist by definition.
They exist from their own side. I read that in the book. Wasn't out of my mind.
Kyodan kappa. Yugyu kyodan kappa ti koransikdo. Yugyu kyodan kappa ti rangitumumi If I go around and hold up this stick and say, this stick has its own starting, and this stick has its own stopping, then in effect, what am I implying?
By definition.
You could, and that's exactly how the Buddha presents it. It looks like the Ali. He says that's exactly the way the Buddha explains it. If it started by, if it did have a nature of growing and stopping, we're following a particular line of reasoning where he said because they aren't that, they can be that, and that they were that, they'd have to be the other way. And in general, what you said is true, but in this particular line of reasoning, we can't. We're not going that way. So don't wander off to those fields out there looking. Generally speaking, in the mind-only school, any kind of starting, any kind of stopping would have to be such that it was by definition. So the implication here is that if something didn't have a starting, and if something didn't have a stopping, which existed by definition, it wouldn't have a starting and stopping. And that's what he's been kind of searching around with. So if you put it into a logical statement of necessity, you have to say that if something has a starting and if something has a stopping, then it must, by necessity, have a starting and a stopping which exists by definition. So when you asked me just before if there could be any other kind of starting or stopping, if it weren't starting and stopping by definition, you're kind of getting your answer here.
Okay. Jordan, how you support ranking to Jordan, how you ranking to Jordan, how you support Jordan.
It's a necessity both ways. It's a killer both ways. If it is in this school, if something has starting and stopping, it must be a starting and stopping which exists by definition. If something has a starting and stopping which exists by definition, then it can have a starting and stopping. And if it doesn't have a starting and stopping which exists by definition, it can't have a starting and stopping. Now, we keep having these little, vignettes where we have little commentates, where you and I discuss something, and then we always have to go back to the book and say, well, here's where the book says that. So we have to go back to the authority or the basis and say, I'm not just making this up, this is not some little conversation. This is exactly, it happens to be the next part of the book. And if you want to see where that little last vignette came from, it was page 19, fifth line from the bottom, up to the second line from the bottom. And in there, the Buddha says exactly what we just said. Now, if we divide, if we talk about things, now let's not talk about things that don't exist, okay? Let's just talk about things that do exist. Okay? So, if it had a kyoda and gapa yuna, that could be a competition. So, if we posit, if we restrict ourselves to things that exist, and then we further make the requirement that this thing should not have a beginning or a stopping, well, where do we end up then? You are right, and what you just said is correct, because you were thinking in terms of the three groups. But if we don't say in terms of the three groups, if we divide all existing things, I know you guys have studied Dura, elementary logic, and Tagrik, elementary, logical forms. So I know you're going to know the answer to this. If you divide all existing things into two categories, what are the two things? Yeah, where did we end up after we kicked out one of those? And that's exactly what the text says. Page 19, second line from the bottom. By the way, I think I just said, Lord Buddha, I think this is Jetsun Kappa, and it says, what is that thing? Means, what is that thing which is devoid of starting and stopping? What are those existing things which don't have starting and stopping? Oh, dumache, okay? Unchanging things which have not been caused or created. Where are we going to put constructs? We're going to put them on the cause side or the uncaused side?
They're not changing.
Oh, that's it.
Don't forget we've been talking about these 4 characteristics, right? We finished the one around the last 4. No starting by itself, no stopping by itself, and then peace from the beginning, meaning not something from the beginning. And then the 4th one, remember, was its nature is to be total nirvana. Right? Its nature is to be totally beyond grief. And one meaning of this is that it's totally beyond all negativities, meaning all mentally afflicted things. Okay, so you can interpret the word grief as meaning all mentally afflicted things. All things having to do with mental affliction grief can be described that way. And then having a nature of being beyond grief can be described as having a nature of being beyond those things which are involved with mental affliction. Mental affliction or involved with mental affliction. Now, among the 2 kinds of objects, changing and unchanging, where are you guys going to put all those mental afflicted things? Now, don't forget, you put the constructs in the unchanging stuff, and then you went and put the mental afflicted stuff in the changing stuff. Is there any mental afflicted stuff that has to do with the constructs?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, were constructs staying with those changing stuff and the unchanging stuff? That's cool. I don't quite like it if you say, that this changing mental afflicted stuff is going to come live in the house of the unchanging constructs that make up your mind. Anyway, if the face has all unchanging things, and then suddenly it gets something out of whack, and something because the nose is like changing, but the face is unchanging, it's not very cute. Make up your mind. How much of it does the memory of this stuff? Or the constant? The good doctor has to do materials. Didn't he? What? Good? Didn't you guys already agree that things having to do with mental affliction are changing? Changing.
We have to do that. We can't hold that.
난 영혼적 그 다음에 처라 영혼적인 저 여버디 죽다디 다 가서 유그레스 방다니 이 켈렌디 쇼레스 나 영혼레스 그다기 체비 처 그다기 처라 영혼적인 저 요레스 세야디 켈렌 가서 켈렌 처음레스 다 교르치
제가 타인지가 어디 간다 보자로 그다음으로 땅파에 그다음으로 땅파에 그냥 이몸 주고 미탁바네
So you have to say that, in a sense, because one is changing and one is unchanging, that constructs living in the unchanging camp, right, are totally free of mentally afflicted things, which are changing things. So in a sense, they are devoid, they are gone beyond. They are a piece of those things, and now he's using those same wording to describe constructs being gone beyond mentally afflicted things, or passed beyond mentally afflicted things, or peace, a state of peace which is free of mentally afflicted things.
저만이 시시도 파트하게 잡고 시하네. 코 시원. 양해지 파게 시하네. 코에 대야 나버서 끝나고. 이제서 시규 파게 잡고 거라 꾸는 뭐 쉬어 샤. 양해 거라 꾸는 뭐 쉬어 샤네. 끝나 힘이가 좀 예야
So we've been describing how constructs are free of all four guys. Right? We got these four guys, which are birth, which exists by definition, ending, which exists by definition, peace, state of being in peace, state of peace, which exists by definition, and then a state of like gone beyondness, which exists by definition. And the first two were easy. You saw how an arisal, which exists by definition, and a stopping, which exists by definition, could not apply to constructs. But now we have to examine, can these last two apply to constructs? And peace means a state of peace which is free of mentally afflicted things. So it's true, you can say about constructs that they are in a state of peace, meaning that they are free of mentally afflicted things. And you can say of constructs as well that they are in a state of nirvana, meaning they are in a state of having transcended or having gone beyond mentally afflicted things. So in that sense, the latter two guys don't apply to constructs. Does that make sense? Is that okay?
The latter two don't apply to constructs?
Right. When they exist by definition.
Maybe because it doesn't exist by definition.
No.
This is your name. Samane Shiva Dang. Nyomochok Chugi Lesh. Nyomochok Chug maybe Shiva. Nyomochok Chug and Digging young and Gabalas. Did you not do Ragitini to be Nyomochok Chug down Embe Shiva Sigure? Nyomochok Chugi when Shiva Sigure. He says it's true whether you add by definition or not. It's true of constructs that they are a state of peace which is devoid of mentally afflicted stuff. And it's also true of concepts that they are a state of peace which is devoid of mentally afflicted stuff which exists by definition. They are Kundatezo, Nyamochoki Chuki, Wembe Shiwa, Yimba, Maimba. Nishirikayo, Nishirikayo, Kewa Me, Kappa Me, Shiwa Me,
Shiwa Me. 나는 신기 용 양해 거래. 양해 되네.
아니, 당분이가 매.
당분이가 껴왔네. 가봐 매. 나보는 매. 다 그때 파트파게 님아 보라. 셔만네. 시스 파트파게 샤네. 시스라.
나서.
나시 용 양은 대. 양해 샤네. 예. 나 보여줘.
Then it's my fault, I think, in the translation. You have to add the word are not to the first two. They do not have a nature of starting by definition. They do not have a state of nature of stopping by definition. But in the latter two, he's saying they are a state of peace which is devoid of mentally afflicted stuff. And then the fourth one is they are the state where you have gone beyond mentally afflicted stuff. So the second two are, in a way, a positive expression of a negative thing. Okay, they are a state of peace which is devoid of mentally afflicted things, and then they are a state of transcendence, of going beyond mentally afflicted things. So that was, I think it was my mistake in the translation. Is that okay? Any problems there? Everybody okay? Okay. Sorry for the confusion. When you say peace, you mean, and by the way, in Tibetan the word peace also means death or stopping, you see. So when you say peace or stopping, it means a state of not having that thing anymore, a state where that bad thing has stopped. And when you say transcendence or nirvana, in Tibetan the implication is gone beyond or transcended or passed beyond a state where the thing is suffering or grief, which here means mentally afflicted things.
그냥 티크만 비자게 교환이 그런 좀 강화는 된다는 게 시와다 당연히 양안에 대해서 마치 치마라서 다 되는 치는 죽여야 제 치는 죽여서 다 단단하게 샤마니 먹거나 다츠 바게 그네 뭐 쉬쉬 샤네 콜레 수시 콜레 예 나는 강난 되게
So you can also describe that triggering process, that progression in that way. So because they don't start because their starting has no nature of existing by definition, and their stopping has no nature of existing by definition, and because of that, now you can go this way. They are in a state of peace which is beyond. They are in a state of peace in which you have stopped, right? Joke in Tibetan, she. You are in a state of peace where you have stopped those mentally afflicted things, and then you are in a state where you have gone beyond the grief of the mentally afflicted things. So you can say it that way too. You can describe this progression that way as well.
죄송하다. 아마니 이거. 한 디케체 되는 면디케체 샤마 디케체 수주주 인간 타마들. 쇼나 주주 인간 타마들. 제가다 자완디 이마체가 이메 그네 이모도 취했어. 미롱이 치를 했어 많이 싫어. 아 신지 용수가 아니었대. 근데 다시 시시였거든. 양에서고 소세. 양에 일 그네 일이 치로 양에 보라.
And so now again I'm going back to the text to give you scriptural authority for the little conversation we just had. Okay, so you go back to page 19, second line from the bottom, and it's here that they identify the peace, for example, and they identify the grief, for example. And here it says peace and a total natural, sort of a natural nirvana, it says here. You can identify those now as being line 2, page 20, as being gun-myong, which means all of those things which have to do with mental affliction. So peace meaning an absence or a rest in peace of the mental afflicted things, and then transcending going beyond mentally afflicted things. And here's the actual scriptural backup for that little conversation we just had.
여기서 어디서 단디네 되게 얘기해. 공식으로 인상이 봤어. 다 군다가 계속 치사해 봤어. 또 그렇고는 내전지야 지금. 다 용도가 상황되는 내다. 미년 벌어. 다 용도가 다 용도라. 아니 갈 수만 있으나 말죠. 랑기 부교하면 가보면 무슨 시 용도라다.
Before I promised you we go in 2 groups, 2 to 3 groups, right? We left out one of the 3 groups. And we promised that we would go through the remaining 2 groups. We have now completed going through the constructs. You can close the case on the constructs, okay? And now we're moving on to Yongdu, which is emptiness in the Michael school, and we have to describe emptiness in terms of the latter 4 of the 5 characteristics that came up during the second term of the yoga. Right? So here we go.
What? 다인데 용도지 교환을 아니 교환을 받아서 시공시 어디 공대나는 공시하지 너희 공대 찍기 장한 거야. 다 찍고 딱 방금 안 갔던 거지. 그래서 인도에서 여사가 돼. 유슈 탐내 인생 이바야 공대. 그냥 내가 먹는 대로 이제 다는 거 있어와. 이제 마 송신 마제도 막에 지혜 송대에서 버들에 다 디슈대는 장관하면 동가지. 디테나 송가래. 다 인도사 또 다 계속 송하는 거 아니야.
Then first we're going to get the quotation from the sutra, wherein Buddha explains what he meant in the sutras, and then you're going to get the explanation by Tenzin Kappa of what that means. So that's a long story. It goes from line 2 or 3 on page 20 down to the next and last line. And Geshe says we don't have to go through that sutra quotation directly word by word. What we'll do is we'll go to Tenzin Kappa's explanation of what that thing means.
Okay. 거기 끝나는 신에지 빠지 타다 끝나는 무슨 신에지 봤어. 저기 라기 대인 주가 믿고 와. 대체기 막 자자. 이 용도를 자자. 막 좀. 내가 그런 거 라기 주게 한 거야. 그치? 네. 용도를 내. 라기 대인 주 깨워 믿고 와. 되네. 지금 마시고 막. 용도를 막. 끝나는 딜 네 아니 괜히 좀 매파 이제 마마마마마 오늘도 개 벌써요. 오늘도 안 쓰는 게 아, 오늘도 가나 가서는 내 난이 괜히 좀 껴옵니다. 이게 막 그냥 나가 집어 된다.
When we discussed the concepts, because it was already something that description number 1 applied to, right? Description number 1 is what? Existing by definition, right? Not existing by definition, right? Out of the 5, not existing by definition. So we said that there was a progression that was triggered by the first one all through the end of the 5. We said not existing by definition triggers not growing by definition, triggers not stopping by definition, means that it is peace or rest in peace of certain things, and then it was going beyond those things. But now, when you talk about emptiness itself, you don't have to have the first one. You will not have the first one. You can't say of emptiness itself that it is not something which exists by definition. So we go straight to the second one. Okay, it's not a 5-step process, it's a 4-step process. So the place where we step off from, the stepping off place, is not going to be the same. We're not stepping off from it doesn't exist by definition. Now we're stepping off from it doesn't have any nature of starting by definition. Is that okay? But there's some of that. I have to think about that. Oh yeah. Okay. It's very according to this. It's with number 2 that we start to things that don't apply to it.
Yeah, it's okay.
How about you quiet ones? Is this okay?
Can you say again? Can you make this say
나 이야기하셨어. 라기스님이 막 더블디 연주비 거 땡기 막 거야 되 주생 카이노스 더블디 라기스님 막 이거디 연주로 시험 막 거야 막 처음에 주생 뭐야 라기스님 주변 means everybody knows that of the 3 groups, 2 of them do exist by definition, and only 1 of them doesn't exist by definition. Did you guys? Everybody knows that. Okay. We baked this cake yesterday. Are your problems all removed? Can we move ahead now? So only 2 of the 3 groups do exist by definition. So you can't use the characterization number 1 with regard to emptiness. That everybody clear on that?
Yes.
The latter 2 characterizations, which is that it has reached the state of peace, wherein the mental afflictions have rest in peace, right? And then the 4th one, which says they have gone beyond or transcended the state of grief. These 2 are easily applicable to emptiness. These 2 are easily applicable to Yongu, okay, to total listening or you want to translate. Why? Because obviously emptiness itself is obviously devoid, or a state of peace, which is wherein everything related with mental afflictions has ended or stopped, rest in peace, right? And then the 4th one, obviously, emptiness is something which has passed beyond or gone beyond a state of grief, in the sense of grief as something which is mentally afflicted. They don't apply to emptiness.
남의 주의스가 계속 있어. 치마치면 그만.
Now Geshe Thubten is going back in discussing especially the fact that emptiness itself does not have those qualities of beginning by definition, right? We did these two, right? We didn't do these two yet, and this one doesn't apply. Right? So in discussing whether or not emptiness itself has the quality of starting by definition or ending by definition, right? In discussing that, Geshe Thubten is going back to the original quotation from the sutra in which the Buddha explains himself in his true intent of the sutras, which covers most of page 20, which takes up most of page 20. And in there are some very difficult expressions in Tibetan. When they got translated from Sanskrit into Tibetan, they become difficult expressions. So Geshe Thubten is trying to help you out with some of the difficult expressions in the sutra when he gets onto the subject of why these two don't apply to emptiness itself. And there's an expression called tapa tapa du and tersu tersu du. Tapa in English means unchanging, as you know. Tersu means in English like self-standing, independent, stands on its own, something like that. And these difficult words, which means the time of the unchanging, and the time of the self-standing. The first one, Geshe Thubten says, refers to all the time that came before. So the time of the unchanging, or the time of the unchanging, means all the time that came before us. And the time of the self-standing, or the time of the independence, refers to all the time which is to come. So these two expressions are referring to all the time that came before and all the time which is to come.
딱 그래서 딱봐 치마 뒤라서 요거 딱봐 생각만 가르네. 치마 가르겠으나 나만 요거 돌아서만 똥이랑 신데 알았어. 정말 가요. 그래 요거 똥이랑 신을 그래. 보다 돼. 주인이랑 내 인자 같이네. 다 요거 나만 내 주인이랑 똥이랑 신데 정말 요거 같이 있나야. 얘는 똥이랑 신데 이거 어디 가르 말했어. 유지해 말.
What's this got to do with proving that these two characteristics don't apply to emptiness, right? Or to Yondu? I have to ask him for a better translation for Yondu. Okay, Yondu meaning Yondu is 16 Yondu again. The indicating that Pinto. But the Tony Yondu, but Tony is Yondu Rangi 16.
다시지. 예, 꼭 가르쳐 쓰는 용수 쭉제도 그런 때는 딱 그만 멋지 잘 그만 멋지 그렇지 제 연대서 우리 저기 돈이거나 용도 진짜 그런 막거나 합사 이네 그 짜장 수유자 아키네 내매기 뭐 줘봐 인자 용수 줘봐 나고 짜장거나 파게 줘봐 900원 채까지 들으시야 돼 초도로지 들으시야 돼 대매 한번 간가로 내매 제가 그냥 많이 넣지 금방 죽잖아 아, 피지에 대매기 뭐 주가 있나? 우리 대매 거나 용수 주나. 다시.
I asked him for a literal explanation of Yongdu because I don't want to keep saying emptiness when he keeps saying Yongdu because now he got to the point where he's saying Yongdu is emptiness, right? And it means total existence, but it just doesn't seem comfortable to me. I think construct is good for Kundan, and things that are dependent is okay for Shenron, but I don't like this saying total existence. So I asked him, is there a literal explanation of why it's called total existence? Why is emptiness? He says, well, let's go back into that Madhvika door, and I'll sneak out something that will help you understand how to translate it into English. The word existence here means, if we talk about a water pitcher, the minute a water pitcher begins to exist, the minute a water pitcher comes into existence, then every single thing to do with the water pitcher, all its parts, everything about the water pitcher, every single tiny piece of the water pitcher is automatically, entirely, totally something that is not self-existent. So, upon the state of existence, all, or the totality of the base, is not self-existent. And that's what total existence means. Okay? So how to translate it into English? I say totally there. Totally there. Anyhow, we'll say totality. Okay, something like that. We'll figure out a word. Okay? When I say totality, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, which is emptiness. Okay. So now we go back to the point. He says, where do those two weird expressions come in to explaining why totality doesn't have these two characteristics? It says the first expression is from the beginning of the beginning, right? From forever. And the second expression is for forever, meaning hereafter. So what does that got to do with proving that totality doesn't have these two characteristics? If you start talking about forever either way, then you're already into the category of unchanging things, aren't we? Okay. So the minute you're into the category of unchanging things, you can't say anything about changing things about it. Starting and stopping are words that only apply to changing things. So that's why we can immediately, upon start, the reason the sutra is starting to talk about these two characteristics from the beginning and forever after, then the reason is that they are talking about the fact that totality, meaning emptiness, doesn't have any nature of starting or stopping anyway. So you don't have to, go into much detail about it. It's no big deal to explain why they don't have starting and stopping by definition. So obviously those two characterizations don't apply to totality, to emptiness itself.
这个他光出现就好了，白写了。出现了，让写了，吃不了嘛？那吃不自由。出现了，吃不真。
Generally speaking, in dealing with Buddhist terminology, you can use a Lama's explanation of the literal meaning of the parts, of the components of the word, to help you understand how to translate the word. But he says, be very careful about thinking that the literal explanation of the pieces of a word is always a definitive understanding of what the word means, because it's not. There'll be many cases in many expressions where if you try to use the literal components of the word that you end up with is not going to be descriptive of all the things that are called with that word, all the things that are named with that word, so be careful with that kind of thinking. Totality is the state of being empty. Okay? Because totality is the state of emptiness, well then it can never change, it will never change, and we cannot speak of it in terms of growing and stopping. So because it is the state of emptiness, because it's imbued with the state of emptiness, then what we call totality cannot be described in terms of starting or stopping. So those two characterizations of it don't apply to it. And the latter two, to repeat, are easy to understand. I don't have to go into any big story about it. If you take the word peace, or having a state of peace, meaning a state of where something has been put to rest, then you can describe emptiness or totality as easily as being something which does not have the state of mental affliction or mentally afflicted things. It is a state of peace where that is absent. And also if you describe it in terms of having gone beyond or having transcended the state of mental affliction, then it's easy to see why emptiness itself has transcended the state of mental affliction. Somebody might raise a question, where did Jetsun Kappa come up with this interpretation of those two difficult phrases from the beginning and from the forever. Where did he come up with his understanding? How did he identify them correctly as meaning all the time past and all the time to come? Yesterday we mentioned, or a couple days ago, we mentioned a Chinese commentary by the Chinaman, and he says that's Jetsun Kappa is saying that's where I got that interpretation from of the sutra's wording. That's where I have learned that it means this thing. Otherwise, they're very weird words. The time of the unchanging of the unchanging, and the time of the self-standing with the self-standing, and I got my interpretation from that particular commentary.
What is it? 한 디샹딩의 대수인가 그랬어. 가르쳐나 파와템의 직점이시고 뭔가 끈들 수 있어. 뭔가 끈들 나는가 이야기 돼. 아예마 용주자 저와 라이팅 저와 매바 가방에 봤으면 저랑 시험냐는데 시고 티지 공식과가 샤왕 용주다 순가시 샤샤 여기 도대 공대 나와 샤왕 샤왕 마샤가 인자 아니 같이 일치 못하면서 근데 나와 순가 샤샤 어디 공대 나와 샤왕 샤 근데 간대
Now there comes an objection. Somebody raises a question. He says, Master Asanga wrote a book called Abhidhamma Samachara. Okay, this is a compendium on higher knowledge. Okay, and then in that text, Master Asanga said that these four qualities, right, not having any starting by definition, not having any stopping by definition, being in a state of total peace from the beginning, and being in a state of transcendence or having gone beyond grief. Okay, he said in that text, this person who's raising this issue says that Master Asanga in that book said that those four attributes apply to all three groups, okay, and not just two of them. So what's that all about?
What is your honest? 다 그들이 나는 순간 시작까지 그런 뭔가 그들이 농구 되네 했어. 오늘 저는 15시 되거든. 얘네 인증 순간들 원하는 거 지금. 근데 뒤에 장 군답이 뭐니가 제니 뭐니면 바탕 저 군다. 현지원은 나 껴 뭐니면 바탕 시원. 용수 주발라 저렇다면 뭐니면 마케바마카파 스면에 시와라 신용수 냥하는 데와 시 송장 뭐다 가지 군다 뭐 군디 찍기 좀 되게 좋아지지.
Here's how the question comes out in the quotation from the Abhidhamma Samachaya. In the Abhidhamma Samachaya, then Master Asanga says, it's because the Buddha said that constructs don't have a nature of existing by definition, and because things which are dependent or caused don't have a nature of growing, and because those things which are, because totality doesn't have a nature of being ultimate, it's because of those three, he says, that the Buddha said that things don't have a nature of existing by definition, things don't have a nature of growing, things don't have a nature of stopping, things are total peace from the beginning, and things are the state of transcending grief. So in the Abhidhamma Samachaya, Master Asanga is saying, because this is true of these three groups, that's why the Buddha spoke about those four, the latter four characteristics. So don't they apply to all three?
용도가 세요. 또 겨 라이팅 좀 해야지. 겨와미 라이팅 좀 가보면 쓰면 라이팅 그냥 무슨 맞지 마. 다 뒤지. 다 시원하고 타니 겨하고 여자. 겨하고 여자. 나기 되니 겨하고 차. 다만 비자져서 나와서. 뒤선부터 도대 공대나 시원하고 타니 겨하고다 가위하고 여자. 이 공식은 맞아도 동과 투성시에서 대가 투성시에.
This is a little bit difficult for me. Okay, when we talked about constructs, we talked about how all five triggered each other, right? We talked about with regard to constructs, it's true that they don't have an existence by definition, and then that easily flowed on to each of the other four. When we talked about totality, which means emptiness, right? Then we skipped the first one because it is true of it. It's not true of it that it doesn't exist by definition. And then we went through the other four. Now when you get to Shenwang, or things which are dependent or things which are caused, it's impossible to speak of it in terms of not having a nominal sort of growing. and a relatively true sort of growing, an apparent growing, and an apparent stopping. You know, nominally, in a nominal sense, it does have those things. So it's to point that out that Master Sangha is talking about all three groups, because what he means to say about the second group is that you have to realize that it does have a nominal growing. It does have a nominal stopping. So the point of him mentioning it here, the second group, is only because he wants to talk about it in terms of having a nominally existent growing and a nominally existent stopping, and other things applying to it as well. So when he's talking about the second group, he's now talking about, remember how we left out first we did all five, we got into constructs. Then we left out the one that we had to leave out when we talked about emptiness. And now he's saying, Master Sangha is saying, and you can also use these with regard to the second group, but you have to adjust them to now also. You have to change them to nominally growing, nominally stopping, like that. I think that's the point. That was difficult for me.
我读书的，那希望了教育在当今就教育搞完没对上，对上。
那里。
对吧？这里说那种大一
点。那杨家这是生的干的，那。
希望了你媳妇的马送了是吧？我的工人也马送了。你说是艺术呢？让你自己注意教育是让希望了没送，让你自己注意刚完面是希望了马送过来，还是公司的马上我但是希望把它看见。 教完人，让你自己教完人，让你自己搞完人。以前的上班单多的工地，多的工地。工地些个。多的工地。知道。所以嘛，多的工地那个，工地搞出了，你那个都马下，往马下。多的工地，工地一下，工地。那是。但下面的多的工地都是希望了，让新慢慢的希望让新公司两个人的一马线。 马些不那个啥，希望拍就差不多要嘛是，希望那个拍就啊的，帮人家已经那怕注意多不是那点，可能你忙错那多不啊，应该现在这个图上面写的，希望那让给你那什么的说，让新公司两个人给第二个是马上来看，希望人家差不多要嘛，希望拍就他那个就两年活当那个希望。 差不多啊，你看六个吧，应该像拍出来的，他那个六个吧，应该你像我马上是多的工地，我说你做啥子的？你这人这个些个，这拍这个是光有拍对，大部分。
Just what I said before. Okay, let's start again. I told him it wasn't really that clear to me, and I'd like him to go over it again. So, just what I said before. Okay. Jetsun Kappa is trying to further elucidate why the Buddha, in the book in the sutra where he explains the Emptiness sutras, did not say that these five applied to things which are dependent or things which are caused. Okay, and he says, Geshe says, let's leave the Abhidharma Sanchay right now. Okay, don't worry about it right now. We'll come back to it. Why is it, Jetsun Kappa says, that Buddha didn't choose to describe the second category, which is things that are caused or things that are dependent, in terms of being those four things, right? Why didn't the Buddha do that? Well, first of all, you can't say they don't have a nature of growing by definition. Why? Because they do have a relatively real or a nominally real nature of growing and if they have that, then that growing has to exist by definition. And that growing is a growing by definition in this school. Okay? And if they have a stopping, which is a relatively true stopping, then you'd have to say that they do have a stopping which exists by definition. So you couldn't say about them that they don't have a stopping which exists by definition, or that their stopping doesn't exist by definition. You couldn't say that, because their stopping does exist by definition in this school. That's why the Buddha didn't apply the first two characterizations to things which things which depend on the causes and conditions. Now what about the latter two? Right? One is a state of peace, which is devoid of mentally afflicted things. One is a state of transcendence, of going beyond things which have to do with mentally afflicted things. And here, Geshe says, if you think about it, most of the things which are changing, most of the things about our current world around us, which are caused, can be described as things that eventually we'll have to eliminate within our being. Like the world that you see around you, most of the parts of you, although not all, and I admit not all, Okay? If I say not all, but I can say that most of the changing things in your experience, the place you live, you yourself, the different parts of your body and mind, are all things that eventually you will have to eliminate and give up and move to a pure version, right? So in that sense, those things cause things, or at least the great majority of cause things in our experience, are not such that they are peace in the sense of being devoid of mentally afflicted stuff, and they are not such that they are transcendence in the sense of having gone beyond mentally afflicted stuff. So Buddha couldn't use any one of those four characterizations when he spoke about changing things, the second category. Now I think he's going to go on to the Abdam Samchara, which I screwed up before.
예, 딱 이게 저 정글로 통화하시면 가마송 무슨 내는 죽은 주사시죠. 죽은 주사시게 지금 죽체 딱 지금 수시 내는 죽 국가대 저이 시기 국가 나왔던 이봐라. 돌레 대답만 시기 나왔던 시간이 돌레 상황 교화 수기 공실 마순반니 딱을 내고라 땡징 되어라 주미 매pa 민배 매pa 민스는 예다 민파 땡비 치리야 제가 두선 시에는 원래 계란이 유교함에 받아 파파 매파 마수마 나도 삼시 예 하시면 되나 양면에 대해 받아 수많은 시간을 하시는 이 깨져도 그것도 좀 문제가 소매 시험 공부하면 시험 빠지 꾸이 다 되나 지금 휴단이 담보 휴단이 얘기는 인생이 받아 인생이 받아라 시험하고 공부하면 나지 시험 패치 유니기 그냥 식치만이 hir을 쓰기서 공실을 쓰기서 맞제 빨리 어디 뭐 정도 나와서 다 식치만이 있을 때 가르쳐는 내가 랑생이 좀 가봐는 가보니 있지 랑생이 좀 나가서 많이 시험을 안 시험하냐 이 공실을 마셔가지고 애인면 취해 패치 또 특징이 되는 거야.
Now, if you want the scriptural authority to back up what I just said about why those four characteristics are not applied, actually the way they stated in Tibetan is that they were not what the Buddha was talking about when he spoke about those four. Okay, the way they said in Tibetan is changing things are not what the Buddha was talking. The reason why they are not what the Buddha was talking about when he said those four things is that what I just said. That those four reasons I just gave you, and if you want to find a scriptural authority for that, we're starting down in the end of page 21, going up to the page, beginning of page 22, and what it says here is, especially, where is that? 5 lines up from the bottom, 21, where it says dole. At this point, they're saying, why wasn't it changing things that the Buddha was talking about when the Buddha talked about those four characterizations, right? And then he answers himself and he says, well, first of all, with regard to the first two, which is they don't start by definition and they don't stop by definition, it's a double negative here. The problem, the reason the Buddha didn't characterize changing things that way is that they are not something which is not dependently arising. Okay? That's why he didn't use those first two terms about it. Why? Because they are not something which is not dependently arising. Meaning, they are something which is dependently arising. That's why the Buddha couldn't say about them that they don't have a starting and stopping which exists by definition. Because at this school, their starting and stopping does exist by definition. Okay? And then with the latter two, it's exactly what I just told you. Page 22, second line, where the Buddha says, Pelcher, Shewa Pelcher. Pelcher means the vast majority, which is a Mahingak, right? Implying that there are things which change, for which the latter two descriptions would be accurate, and would be acceptable. But because the vast majority of them, Pelcher, are involved or are included into the group of things that we call mental afflictions, or the results of mental affliction, or the cause of mental affliction, we call all these together. That's why I've been saying mentally afflicted things and not mental afflictions. It's a very important distinction. So they belong to the mentally afflicted side of stuff. Okay, and that's why, because most changing things in our experience belong to the mentally afflicted side of stuff, the Buddha they were not what the Buddha was thinking of, they're not what the Buddha had in mind when he said those last two things. Oh, things are at peace from the beginning. Things are in a state of rest from the beginning. Or things have transcended grief, meaning mental afflicted stuff from the beginning. Okay, and that's why those four were not, that's why the Buddha didn't have changing things in mind when he spoke about those four. I hope he gets back to that sometime. Kundu is waiting to grab you. Waiting in ambush. Abhidhamma Samachaya is waiting in ambush.
식치만이 시만 제가 송도 다른 주마야 예신인 거 가서 이제 제가 또 인치랑 근데 아메리카 유리가 식치만이 시를 제가 식치만이 갔다 세계나 삼고 저 식치만이 레벨이 시로 왔어. 양이 저한테 가봤나 봐. 제가 식치만이 있잖아. 세만이 시와다 아시죠? 야.
He says, be careful later when you translate all this stuff into English. You're going to get to this part where it talks about Sikchima and Sikchima. Sikchima literally means the latter two words, meaning the latter two expressions, meaning the latter two of the four. So he says, don't forget it. You know, when you get to this later and you're translating into English, and you run into this little expression that says the latter two words, it means the latter two characterizations, meaning in a state of total peace from the beginning and totally beyond grief. I think you better put a little star next to that expression that says the vast majority of caused things are involved with mentally affected stuff. Because I think you might be having some questions arising in your mind right now about that statement. Did you put your stars? What did Master Sangha mean in the Abhidhamma Samachaya in the Compendium of Higher Knowledge when he said those four characterizations apply to all three of the groups? And what did he have in mind when he said that? Well, I take you back to the other day when we were talking about how these three groups didn't have any nature. You know, one didn't have any nature of such and such, another didn't have any nature of such and such, another didn't have any nature of such and such. Let's go back to that. Let's grab those ideas, those concepts that we had the other day, and shove them into the future and bring them here, and let's try to use them here. Do you think there's any application? Got any ideas about any application to the present question? Let's go, Franz.
We just have to see which one applies to which. Just like, well, with he's talking about never applying distinctly according to which city you're talking about. Right? So maybe it's the same thing. You apply before and see which ones they apply to, and you find out that one of them doesn't get any at all. But that's the way
I didn't catch you there.
Oh boy.
He's saying if you group the
Oh,
three
okay, okay,
groups
okay.
with the four colors,
Just see that they
one
follow
will
up.
apply to each.
If
Some
one
of them will
turns
apply to
out
some
that
of them.
doesn't get-
Some of them apply to
You mean some of the four characterizations do apply to some of the three groups and some don't apply? No, but he's trying to show
I don't know.
why was it that Master Sangha seems to be saying these four characterizations do apply to all three groups? And what is it about the other day when we talked about the three groups relating correspondingly to three kinds of a lack of natures, right? Lack of nature for having the characteristic, lack of nature having any nature, right? Lack of nature having any ultimate, right? What are those two? Do those three have any applications to this question of why did Master Sangha say that those four characterizations apply to all three?
maybe if we reach into that Chalchewa, can we pull out the pure paths of the practice?
Chalchewa said control.
아니 그냥 다라지만 계속 기억이 있어. 이 약간 내가 란기 생이 막 걸어가고 란기 막 숨어서 어제 보니까 공식 같은 샤워서 저까지 이제 이제 오는 딱 솔직히 왜 수업을 하고 말했어. 나 어서 이 단계는 이 샤워가 란기 생이 좀 세야 그상 가는 시에요.
Don't you remember this morning when I asked you about the expression existing by definition and not existing by definition? And I asked you how many of the three groups did this apply to and how many of the three groups should it not apply to? And then you guys went into this long explanation. Some people said 2 and some people said 3. You said most people agreed in the end that you could say of only one of the groups, right? That it didn't exist by definition, right? And then you agreed that you had to say of the other two groups that things exist by definition. But then some of you were flirting with the idea that some of them, that all 3 perhaps didn't exist by definition. Do you remember? And do you remember why you thought that? And anything to say about, could that apply to what we're talking about?
Because the Buddha said that things don't exist by nature, that have qualities that start and that have ultimate nature, and those 3 things correspond directly to the 3 attributes of the mindfulness school. So,
Okay,
so if the Buddha said that those don't have any nature, then did he mean, then it could be said that they don't exist by definition.
Okay. Shewanliya, Kundalia, Chiniki Modi, yes, Shewanla, Kiwa Modi, yes, Yondulia, Kunda Modi, yes, Cheris, then really, Moni Messiah Sixty Yoris, and Moni Messiah 60, I can tell you about Juba and Jore, Jova Yina, but I can tell you about Juba, Shawana, necklace.
타티가 샤와나 콜파레가 돌아다니는 거 메스 샤와가 깨지다 이게 가다기라 해. 그거랑 그냥 식숨을 위해서 뭐라는 거야. 숨기나 보는 거야. 깨지다 샤와가 콜파발레 저랑 생이 맞고 숨이하고 샤와가 빠지다 샤와랑 생이 맞고 버리 시세이 내가 이렇게 생각하는 그 대자 시야가 좀 멘트 샤와가 그다음에
So let's forget constructs and let's forget totality and emptiness, right? Let's concentrate on things that are dependent. And I understand your point, it's well taken. Perhaps the fact that the wording, not having a nature, might refer to, in general, not having nature of existing by definition, and that might apply, it seems to be applied correspondingly to all 3 of them. So in that case, it seems to apply to things which are caused. And in the middle turning of the wheel, in the second turning of the wheel, it is true that the Buddha was talking about things not existing by definition. I lost the rest. Anyway, so let's just talk about things that come from causes. Let's just decide whether or not they can be in any way characterized as not existing by definition. How do you think we can do that? In what sense could that apply to them? I'll give you a clue. Okay. Try to make it easier. How is it that the expression doesn't have a nature of growing, right? How is it that that applies to things that have growing?
They don't have mutuality. That comes separately from each other.
Kiawangoni meba se tunda de dikaresana Judan ken na makeva mayis. Depends on the way. Is that just her idea, or anybody else have ideas?
What did she say?
She said, remember that the meaning originally, back in the old days, right, of characterizing cause things as not having a nature of growing meant not having a nature of growing without the causes and conditions, right? So she said, does that have any application here? Does that help you?
Also, that's one, and then the other one is they don't go from the causes that you think are the causes.
When you understand, you kewa ngoni meba dilia nagani yores. Kiwangoni Michael said, Dunda Chikti, Rangi Kiken, Makeba Mayin, Chikte Randa Nani Chikti. Yeah, I got I just brought up that second point because I knew Los Angeles would sooner or later start teaching you that black book, which is a monastic textbook on the subject, because it concentrates so much on that point. But right now you can pack it up and just leave it away, leave it aside. It's not a Bible course. Just discussion. He's saying that Christy was on the right track. Christy's point was that when they talked about things having causes, depending on their causes, as not having a nature of starting, they meant not having a nature of starting without depending on their causes and conditions. So if you interpret from the mind-only school point of view, the wording of Lord Buddha in the second turning of the wheel, when he said things don't have a nature of existing by definition, if you interpret those words with regard to things that depend, growing things, right, as meaning they don't have a nature of growing without depending on their causes and conditions. So that's how you take what it means when the Buddha said things don't exist by definition, when he referred to changing things in the second turning of the wheel. Well, then, this quotation in the Compendium of Higher Knowledge by Master Sangha begins to make sense. Because then you can say, of those category of things which are changing or depending on their causes, that they don't have a nature of starting by definition, and they don't have a nature of stopping by definition, and they are in a state of total peace from the beginning, and they are transcended from that thing, because in that case, the word existing by definition now doesn't mean what it usually means in the mind-only school. It rather means they don't have a nature of existing by definition in the sense, but they don't have a nature of having come about without depending on causes and conditions. He wants to know if Anila got all that I just said.
No.
Several rounds.
I thought that the definition is different.
Yeah, but what the Buddha meant is that this thing is just by definition.
But it's different.
When you're talking about changing things, it
Yeah.
has a totally different meaning now.
Yeah.
It means that they don't not have a name cause of did that pass? Shen Wangi Chene, Polo Paba Nalea, Sagi Chombe Deki, that's what I can Magiba Reyes said. Monitane di Chick, Kinde Sherina, Ragi Kiken, La Kepa Mayensi, Today, Shen Wangi, I can tell you to Bekio, the Kappa, the Sumunishi, the Yosuman again. They said Chogres, yeah.
다 간지 되게 너무 때문에 다 그때 누워나 여러 누워나 빼잖아 남바 있지다 대전화 가서 좀 이게 도 남주를 알아 남주를 알아 아 하고 칼이 깨져라 뭐지 남주를 때 제 발전 팔 하고 있어요 양이 가지 남주데 아우 딱 하고 있어 말이에요 아니라 하고 맨
I can't read Anima's mind, but there is this thing in Vinaya that says about, you've had a communicating form which communicates through intent or the state of mind. Person doing it. So in Vinaya they talk about, outer indicates the state of mind of the person who has it. And I was just checking her communicating form there. And I noticed that it seemed to communicate some, that she didn't get 100% of what I said about that, or the way Muslim Chisholm translated it. So I just wanted to check and make sure. I think Roy got it though. If he looks at his communicating form. Did you get it? So he says, if you clarify the reasoning with regard to each one of those four characteristics, if you clarify each one carefully, you say, well, this is what this one means in this case, this is what this one means in this case, this is what this one means in this case. With each of the three groups, then you see how they can apply.
Okay, 다 근데 뭐가 근데가 아바통 뭐가 근데가 상황가 디라초고 디라초를 세고 그다음에 생 가능한 마트를 껴갖고 매누가 거 진제랑 이 생이 주어지는 거야. 진제랑 이 생이 주어야 말은 진제 나서 그러나 또 얘기 진제랑 이 생이 주어가 말은 진제 수만이 쉬워. 근데 양양에 되는 소리야. 근데가 조상시에 상황상에 조상들이 있어.
So Jetsun Kabe is saying, when Master Asanga, in his compendium on higher knowledge, said that those four characterizations do apply to things which are caused, what he really had in mind was, they don't have a nature of growing by definition. When you take the words by definition to mean, they don't have a nature of growing without the causes. Okay? And when you say they don't have a nature of stopping by definition, what you mean is they don't have a nature of, in this case, only with shenwons, only with things that are dependent on their body, that they don't stop through any nature which is not dependent on causes and conditions. Okay? And then the other two are easy too. So all four, Master Asanga, what he has in mind really is a reinterpretation for cause things of what it means to exist by definition, and then it all clears up. Then all four, then changing things could have been what the Buddha had in mind when he spoke those four things also. Are we okay on that, guys? Okay.
Could you say another way and say, by their definition alone, to rule out their causes? Say they don't grow by definition, by the definition alone, in the sense that they don't, just in and of themselves, they need something else. Is that what they do?
Rangi tsini ki dupe kiawan mes, and got shawangi wrong tsini. Rangi tsini ki dupe kiawan mes, and got the cancer in it. Kap dela, tutu kap dela, rangi tsini ki dupe. Kiawa mes, rangi tsini ki dupe se adi rangi bigena ni kiawa mes. Dene sun chomres. Yine anchitan rangi tsini ki dupe kiawa se adi gamya, rangi kiawa se adi that rangi kiawa se adi, rangi yuda kena ni kiawa se adi, dosi chena.
rangi se sa karsa rangi se rangi teni su kiawa ko shawan yoke
That's okay, but you got to be careful because, in general, the expression, they have a way of growing which exists by definition, is something they do accept, in general, with regard to changing things. So if you adjust that word into saying they have a nature of growing by themselves, they might actually accept that if they thought that you meant by definition. If they thought that you meant by those words by definition, because they don't demand that with things that change. So that's why we don't run that circle. Listen. Nothing. It's a good thought that you had, it's a valid thought that you had, and I think you were trying to speak off of when you came up with that thing that by definition could mean by themselves, you were trying to sneak off into the market.
내가 순간 상황상 너도 보내는 상황 마셔가지 아니 상황 걸어 싸워 놓아가지고 가서 너도 보내는 마셔가지고 싸워 놓아가지고 지금 마셔가지고 여보요 내 싸워 내 놓아가지고 이게 카카 스키는 이니까 결국.
So if on one hand you say that the original sutra only applied those four characterizations to two groups, and then you get to Abhidharma Suchaya and Master Sangha has applied it to all three groups. If you don't go ahead and reinterpret what existing by definition means in one case as being distinct from the meaning of existing by definition in the other case, then you have a loss. Then you have a problem. Case is closed. Let's go on.
요도 대단한 거는데 지금 요도 세를 지금 딱 그러면 죽기지 나는 거지 다시네 그다 난 생각이 네 진짜 끝나고 가샤와 진짜 끝나고 대주야 그러나 무슨 비싼이 있다 이런 제보 여러분 뒤바지 순방면 싹지지로
So we've been talking about these three lacks of a nature. We started out talking about how constructs don't have a nature, and we talked about how quantities don't have a nature, and then we got into talking about emptiness doesn't have a nature, certain natures, and then we were describing how this applied to them or this didn't apply to them and all that. But you know, you didn't really describe what is a kunda, what is a construct. You know, what does it mean when you say dependent on others? You know, what does it mean when you say totality? You know, what are those three groups? We didn't really get to that. So here, finally, after the fact, he says, we're going to get a section in which Jetsun-Kappa goes into identifying what those three groups are for us, because even though you and I have been talking about these three groups and sort of come to an identification of them through our conversation, if you think about it in the text so far, he hasn't really formally gone into an explanation of what those three groups are. So here we start off, page 22, about 7 lines down from the top, and we're going to identify what those three groups are attributes. They're called attributes, right? What those three attributes are. In identifying those three groups and what they are, what it means to be in one of those three groups, the biggest hassle, the worst hassle, is the first one. I mean, what does it mean to be a construct? And that's a real hassle. Things that depend on other things, you know, things that go from other things. We are wearing them, we are eating them, we are sitting on them. That doesn't take a genius to describe those. If you can describe musun tuna, yabu musun tuna, adik kunda tu nela ama. If you tackle the problem first of what are constructs, then it gives you a big head start on understanding what the third group is, meaning totality, meaning emptiness. So if you tackle the difficult one first, then you have in Tibetan they say a place to chew on. You have a good starting off point. Then you can tackle the subject of what is the emptiness. So it's a lot easier to tackle number 3 once you've tackled number 1. I'm just again laying out for you the road that we're going to travel down tomorrow morning. 이만가만 근데 로규디 차비하러 차비하디 내가 채워지는데 아니 그거 다산이 유튜브에 있어요. Yeah, you gave me, now you gave me, you're just like this. Do you remember I told you to make a star somewhere? You need to use the star. I think I'd better go back to that star and you can touch. Didn't I just tell you to stick a star on something?
Yeah.
What was
Yeah.
that?
Vast majority of
It might pop into your mind, you might, actually it popped into my mind, I don't know about you, but when he got to the point and said, the vast majority of caused things are tied up with mental affliction or mental afflicted things, then I started to think, and he said you might start to think, of all those beautiful things in Buddha paradises, all those beautiful parts of the Buddha that are changing, and so if you get into statistics, well, which one outnumbers the other, are the changing things that are fantastic or Buddha-ish, are they more numerous, or are the changing things which are samsaric or mentally afflicted more numerous? So let's get into a head count. Who's going to come out ahead? What do you think? Can we say vast majority?
For who? He says it's very helpful to think that way. That's a very true statement, and it has great benefit for you to remind yourself of the truth of that. And so I'll allow you to stick your head into that door, but please don't go all the way in there. When Jetson Kappa uses the wording vast majority, what he really has in mind is, listen, because we're studying, by definition, the very fact that we're sitting here studying these things means that we are in the condition of people who have not reached there yet. We are not people sitting in a Buddha paradise, thinking about these things, and our normal experience is from the point of view of somebody who has not yet made great progress along the path. So it's what we call the original condition. There's a word in Tibetan called the original condition, or the initial condition of samsara, meaning we are in the state of what we call the initial condition. The vast majority of what we experience, the vast majority of things around us, the vast majority of the person who has not yet entered the path and made great progress along the path, those things are either mental afflictions or tied up with mental afflictions. And it's not the point, Geshe Thubten is not trying to say that statistically, on the whole, that there are more samsaric things than enlightened things. That's not the case, and that's not what the word vast majority means here. Vast majority means here that in the original condition of our world, of our lives, the vast majority of things are either mental afflictions or tied up with mental afflictions.
영어로 뭐 동거 좀 꼬나 되는 진짜 네가 나랑 하고 이거 코나 사타 지하 코나 그냥 나하고 좀 야채 진짜 리빠디키 리페키 코 튕비키 이게 내가 나도 모르겠다. 저거랑 동거 좀
This is Jessica's style, and you can apply the style to other situations. You know, if you understand what's going on with this word vast majority, then you'll understand what's going on whenever he does that kind of thing, because this is his style. He's talking about it from this point of view. By the way, I forgot to translate one thing. He said, also, not only are those things yet to be reached for us, but they are also beyond our capacity of understanding or imagining even. So when he says vast majority, he's also saying that the vast majority of what you can even grasp or imagine, the things that you can imagine, most of them are mental afflictions or have to do with mental afflictions. We are incapable at the initial level of even imagining those things in the Buddha realm. So we can say vast majority in that case, in that sense also.
Sera Mey